Isn't being a private investigator really just a matter of using common sense? Hi, Larry K, ShadowAnyone.com, and the creator of the Investigator's Ultimate Guide series, Premium Private Investigator Training, from someone who's been there and done that. This idea that private investigating and using the skills and tips and tricks that we know is really just common sense if you think about it. And make no mistake, you should have common sense on these things. It should be common sense to you that if you're going to do surveillance on a residence, you don't park right in front of the residence. You know, those types of things. If you don't, when you're doing surveillance, you're sitting there in your vehicle, turn off the headlights. It's common sense. Now, one of the investigators that used to work for me that I trained, I spent the time bringing him on board, training him. And the very first surveillance I sent him out on, I sent him and he sat up watching the house that needed to be watched, and I sat up further away watching him. Of course, he knew I was there. We had radios. We were in communication. But as much as I had taught him and as much as he had learned, going out there and really doing it, he got into position, but he had left his headlights on, and I was able to radio him and tell him, hey, turn off your headlights. And it's not that he didn't know that, and of course it's common sense, but he just got caught up in all the million other little things you've got to know about and take into consideration when you're really out there doing it and not just sitting back as an armchair quarterback later on. Actually doing it, you have to have some proficiency. Now, what this means is, yes, it's common sense to turn off the headlights, but it's easy to forget. There are other things that seem like common sense, but they're really not. They're the type of things that when you learn them, you go, oh, that makes sense. I would have never figured it out on my own. I would have never really gone down that route in my mind. I would have never figured this out, but it makes sense. Now, the tricky part is, for people who are outside of the industry, for the real, living in their mom's basements type of guys, they look at these things and they say, well, that's just common sense. No, it's not. It's the type of thing that makes sense once you know it, but you're not going to know it until someone teaches it to you. So there is a real difference. Be sure that you use your common sense, but be sure you learn the tips and tricks and techniques that will allow you to, the tips and tricks and techniques that just make sense. You can learn those from the Investigator's Ultimate Guide series. Of course, I've got process serving guide. I've got the surveillance guide, which is full of things that once you know them, you go, well, that makes sense. If you'd like to try something just on a little bit more economic scale, look at 51 Dirty Tricks Bad Guys Really Hate, my book over at Amazon, my best-selling book over at Amazon. And you'll read through that and you'll know right away. You'll say, oh, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. But don't mistake it with common sense. So this is Larry K, ShadowAnyone.com, inviting you to look at and learn the things that make us good investigators. And remember, do the right thing, even if it's the hard thing.